Thank you for being here this morning. And I'm looking forward to getting to know each and every one of you. It's going to take maybe not too long to be able to learn your names and to meet you on a personal basis. But I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much. I appreciate the elders allowing me to join the team here, and so I'm looking forward to that. Last time that I was here, I began a somewhat of a series, and I'm going to continue that series actually. It is entitled Walking with Jesus. And last time we looked at 4 characteristics of how Jesus interacted with people. And I'm taking the Gospel of John, and one of the unique characteristics of the Gospel of John is that it records a lot of one-on-one interaction that you don't get in the other Gospels. There seems to be an emphasis in John on reporting these close and tight-knit interactions, things that happen as I'm going to talk about this morning behind the scenes that no one's noticing. And that also kind of makes me have a sense of wonder that God would take the time to deal with individuals, instead of coming and trying to reach the masses. He chose 12 and he spent time teaching them, but then he had a group of 3 that he did certain things with, and then he had one that evidently was pretty close that Jesus had a special relationship with. So God's interested in the entire world, but I think the principle might be that it's one person at a time, It's that kind of interaction and engagement. And so in the Gospel of John, we have that ministry that Jesus is illustrating for us and how he goes about and interacts with people. So when you look at what he did and how he goes about his work on earth as a representative of how God would do it, and he is God incarnate, we learn how to do ministry. We learn what it means to be spiritually minded and have a worldview that is, God-focused. And so watching Jesus very closely is what the Gospels are presenting to us, particularly in the Gospel of John. So that's why I want to kind of continue that trajectory as we look at different individuals that he engages with. And I think each one gives us a unique perspective and what it means to being our world as a Christian. And so it's not just church. It's like, do we learn, or how can we learn to walk with Jesus at work? What are the things that would characterize our life? How would we be representatives of God and of Christianity in the way that Jesus would want us to be? So those are very real and practical, I think, ideas and questions. So Jesus is available, we talked about. He is near to all of us. John 1:14, the Word became flesh. And so here we have deity incarnate who is living and breathing as we do. And so we can see him as the disciples did. They saw him, they touched him, they conversed with him. And so that's a very intimate, I think, relationship when you think about God. God's made himself very intimate to his creation by being with them on earth. So let's flesh it out a little bit. What is God really like? Now, I'm not asking, I know Jesus is the representative of God, but as you see the activity of Jesus, you're also seeing what God does. There was I guess, it's been several years since you had What Would Jesus Do bracelet and that emphasis that went about. And, there was an interesting book that was written with that title. And so the challenge is not that we don't have any idea what God would do in this situation. I don't think that's an excuse. I have no clue what to do. Well, it might be that we haven't watched him in similar situations and how he dealt with common threads of human existence and problems and dilemmas and challenges. Because although he was tempted like everyone, he was without sin. What does that mean? It means that he knows his creation, and he experiences that which we experience because he was human. There's a common thread about us. We're all unique. We're all different. We all have peculiarities about us and idiosyncrasies and things like that. But there is one thing that binds us together. We're human. And the human experience is experienced by all humans. And so God has shown his closeness to us by taking on the human experience. So as we look at Jesus, we want to see what would Jesus do in a situation. What would Jesus do in reacting to a challenge or to a request for help? And so, what is he really like? Jesus said, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." What exactly does that mean? Are we just simply to see him as Christ incarnate who died on the cross? Well, that's the plan of redemption, but isn't there a lot of ministry that takes place before he gets to the execution? That's the ultimate gift that was given. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. That's the ultimate gift. But there's a whole lot of human life that Jesus had and existed and provided an example before he got to that particular point. And that's what I'm focusing on. I accept that, but this is also teachable too in his life experiences. So I want us to notice some things about his interaction in John chapter 2. John refers to this as his first sign. There's several ways to organize the Gospel of John. Two of the most significant things actually come in this story or narrative about the wedding in Cana. You have in John 7 signs. Okay, a sign is that which points to something. I know how far away I am from a certain destination because I see a sign that gives the city and the mileage. That was very important when I first came here, to make sure I was gauging the time right. How far away am I from the church building or Wetumpka or things like that. We look at signs. So the sign is not that which you are to be enamored about and hug it and worship and bow before it. The sign leads to something that it's pointing to. Okay? So John is organizing a gospel from the history of the ministry of Jesus to provide signposts that people can see that says you're getting closer to who he is and understanding it. Because John is the one that says there's so much I could have written, but these things have been written so that you may know and that you can have eternal life. And so there's really, from John's perspective, no more that you need. The signs are sufficient. Pay attention to the signs. And so the first sign occurs in John 2. And it's an interesting sign. But I don't think, well, I shouldn't make such a stereotype statement. I know me, and I know me as a preacher. I have used this particular narrative in a way that it is not as it's recorded in application. In other words, there's things in the story that all of a sudden get our attention, and we go off on a rabbit trail and never deal with the application of what's there in John 2. And you'll know what I mean when we get to it. There will be something that bubbles up in you, particularly if you've been a member of church a while, because this was a verse that was used to prove this or not to prove this. And so I want us to look at that. John chapter 2 and verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now, there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification. containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This was the beginning of the signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, when I read that, what has been the emphasis in the teaching or the use of this story in Cana of Galilee? Anything? Is the wine. Okay. Is it alcoholic or was it grape juice? Let me tell you something. I don't think either side can use this verse as a proof for what it was. That's not the issue of the text. There's arguments for both sides. No one can use this verse to substantiate social drinking. It has nothing to do with that in regard to the setting and the narrative. I don't think that anyone can use this and then argue and continue to argue that it was grape juice. It could be. Wine was generic. It was a generic term. So because we have spent a lot of time, I always get nervous when I teach this because I know people want to, they have the question, was it alcoholic or was it the fruit? Well, let's just disabuse of that because that's not the issue. Let's just take it. If you want to take it as alcoholic or if you want to take it as sweet wine or grape juice, okay, just let it be whatever that is. All right? So now you can disabuse yourself of that. Are you with me? Okay. Now I have my opinion on it, but I don't think that's the issue. All right? So if we take that out, then what is the significance of the story? See, that's what I missed in all of my years of Bible study because I always had to deal, I used this verse as a proof text for a certain thing. And I realized, I'm really distorting the word because it's not addressing that. They didn't have very much to drink back in the first century. Water, goat's milk, and fermented wine. They needed a lot of wine because they would mix it with water to kill the bacteria and all the things in order to make it drinkable. That's why we read in even extra biblical material that they would take wine and then they would dilute it with water. Okay, but that was basically it. They didn't have Diet Coke. I don't know how I would live without Diet Coke. Do you? Well, you probably say, well, it's not Diet Coke for me, it's something else. Well, see, that's the point. There's not much to choose from back in the first century. There's a whole lot to choose from now. That's still not the issue. The issue is something other. It has to do with the beginning of his signs. And so that's what I want to look at. What do you think is the point of the passage? Think about that for just a moment. Let me kind of set the stage a little bit. There's been different ways that people have approached the idea of communing with the sovereign or with deity or with the gods. Okay? One of the ways is the idea of withdrawing. Okay? In other words, if you really want to commune with God, you withdraw from society or culture and you go off somewhere. There was a group called the Desert Fathers that kind of shed their population and homestead and the city life and the culture, and they went out into the wilderness and lived. The Desert Fathers. These were the individuals that cast aside all that had to do with modernity during their days and all the conveniences, though limited, because they believed if they withdrew, then they would have an opportune time to really focus on what is spiritual and communing with God. And we still have people in religion who think that way. It's to withdraw. Okay, that's one way. You can go and live on a pole. You can go live in a cave. But that's not going to make you spiritual. But it's become an idea, a grandiose idea. The other way that people can commune with God is they turn inward. It's like my personal belief. That's how spirituality is used a lot today. You know, when people talk about being spiritual, they basically defined it themselves, and they're talking about their belief, only their belief, and their relationship to God. It's mine. And so that's the emphasis. It can be different from you. You may go this trajectory, I may go the other trajectory, but, you know, all's fair in religion. You know, it's because it's personal. And isn't it a personal relationship with God? Yeah, it is personal, but it's a little bit broader and bigger and deeper than that. But that's what people can do. They can turn inward. And so the consumption is whatever I can do to find fulfillment in that arena of the divine. Okay? So we can withdraw, we can turn inward. The other thing is, of course, this represents most of the ancient world. A lot of it had to do with trusting in idols and objects and symbols. And so when you read the Old Testament, you find about household idols. You know, Jacob even had, you know, some household idols. And others would, when there was a rush on a city that was put under the band of God saying, all the spoils are mine, just leave them out there, don't take anything. Well, what was taken? Household idol. You know, the destruction of Ai and Jericho and all those things, there were always this idea that having these symbols and objects and idols helped me become closer to God. There's a danger in that, to where we begin to, I guess, convey too much importance on a symbol or an object, that we start to think because I have that, it will protect me, instead of understanding that perhaps the symbol is representative, it's a sign to something else. That's the danger of idols, is it becomes the object of worship and adoration. So that's what the ancient world is all about. Carrying the idols, household idols, putting something that protects you and that gives you an entryway or a segue into the divine experience and communion. Okay? Now, on the opposite of this, these all almost, you know, seem somewhat noble. The opposite of that is cast aside all restraint. That's what Paul was dealing with. When he made the statement, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? See, in the reasoning, it seems silly to me to think that way, but when you think about what's happening, they're really thinking that in order to show God's love and God's grace and that He is accepting, let's be an example of that and cast away all restraint, and then they'll see that God will accept even someone like me who's doing these things. It almost has a sense of logic to it, but Paul, in response to that, what did he say? God forbid. Okay, it's a very strong statement. God forbid that we think that way. It's not what it's about. We show the grace of God and love of God in other ways, not in the way that, you know, God accepts me even though I'm going to engage in sin. I'll show you how much love God has for me. Okay? But that's one way in which people sought communion with the divine. Well, I don't think any of these are really biblical, but I do think what Jesus is illustrating in this particular event is biblical. So in John chapter 2, he goes to Cana of Galilee for a what? A wedding. Okay, just that statement. He goes for a wedding. What does that tell you about Jesus? What does that tell you about him? He's what? He's social. Yeah. What else? He got invited, and we learn also that Mary is there, and she seems to be very close to the family. Jesus is not taking the situation and say, I need to be separate from, society and all these social things because I'm the Son of God. See how that reasoning can affect people? Because of who I am means that there's, I hate to use this word, there's distance between you and God. Okay? So some would probably come to Jesus and say he needs to practice social distancing because he is divine and we are not. And why are you involved in these things? We as human beings do that if we're not careful to our spiritual leaders. That's what people do in religion. You have a title, and then you have that title, and that creates distance. All right? Well, Jesus isn't doing that. He's the Son of God, and there's no announcement. I don't read about any announcement. Of course, I'm speculating here. It's dangerous to speculate, but I think this is a good speculation. There's no announcements. There's no palm tree leaves. There's nothing that's announcing, here comes the Lamb of God to this wedding. And the wedding stops, and they marvel at the Son of God who's coming. Is that how the account reads? In fact, it almost reads that nobody really cares that much as he's there. He doesn't seem to be the prominent one. He's kind of where? In the background. His mother's in the background helping, and she must be there helping and near to the activities because she senses something that's a problem. And she comes to Jesus about it. So, to me, being spiritual doesn't mean to withdraw. Now, there is this idea, I need a footnote. You are a saint, right? You know what a saint is. What's a saint? What? We're set aside. That's one side of the coin of saint. What's the other side? What's that? Okay. Yeah, there it is. To do God's will. We're set aside for the purpose of God. That's what saint means. But we have in society, not us, we probably thought that way before we learned what a saint was. Always like to use, different titles. We say brother and sister so-and-so, and you kind of get uneasy if someone says saint, Saint Scott, Saint Jimmy. You kind of have a reaction to that, don't you? Why? And our whole vocabulary. And plus, you have a major religious group that has sainthood and, all these things. So the idea has sort of been distorted, but see, the church has put it back in its rightful place. It's there for the using, is what I'm saying. Okay? Because in practically every letter, the church is called people who are saints. And I haven't really looked at it. I just thought about this might be something to run off a tangent on. Not right now, but to think about. I wonder how much saint is used more than brother or sister. If they're kind of equal. I'll look into that. Maybe that's an interesting question. At least it is to me. I don't know. But you're looking at saint. Saint just means we're set apart. We're set apart from sin because we've been cleansed sanctified, all of that, those are good Christian terms, Bible terms, for a purpose. Serve God, okay? So, let me ask you this. If we went to a wedding, is that serving God? If we're social, does that mean that we're serving God? Can be, yeah. It's not around a possibility. Now, if we're there to be an agitator, I don't think you're serving God's purpose. This brings us to other aspects of the story. Now, we know that the wedding and the wedding feast is on the brink of a catastrophe. Catastrophe is about to happen. What were weddings like in the first century? You got any idea, any thoughts about weddings in the early church century? Yeah, it was a community event. Why would it be so significant, a community event, a time of joy? Why? Well, I mean, we have weddings, but the whole city doesn't come out. There wasn't much to do back then. You know that, don't you? They didn't have theaters. Now, we're experiencing this because everything's shut down, and so maybe we're experiencing a little bit of how it was in the first century. There's nothing to do. So they didn't have a lot of the entertainment things that we do, and so a wedding was a big thing in the community. And it lasted 7 days. Now, I know in weddings, when we, I performed both of my daughters' wedding. And we took a big breath after it was over. You know, it was a big deal, all the planning and all that stuff. But can you imagine the dinner we had, lasted, an hour maybe at the most or whatever, 2 hours. Can you imagine having a dinner of coming and going guests for 7 days? Do you know how crazy you would get making sure everything is prepared and ready and the house is swept? Everything looks good. Can you imagine the chaos? Just putting myself, knowing that I've gone through weddings, and all the planning that goes to it, and sometimes the arguments that happen, and preparations, and the decisions, and the conflicts. There's a lot of stuff that happens. But for a feast, there's a lot of preparation to be made for a 7-day feast. What do you need for the feast? You need food. You need food, and you need food and drink, hospitality. You also need water for ceremonial things. When people came, they washed their feet. I mean, how many people are coming? How many feet need to be washed? We learned from this family that they had servants. It may indicate that this family was pretty well off to have servants and all that they did, but there was still something that was, I shouldn't say brewing. There was something brewing in the background that was going to cause a catastrophe. They're about to run out of provisions. And who detected that? Mary did, mother of Jesus. Something's wrong. Something is going to be an issue if we don't intervene. And so, what was tragic about the wine's giving out? Well, you have to know something about times in antiquity. It's a lot of it's the same, but a lot of it's different. The whole society revolves around this idea of honor and shame, embarrassment, humiliation. You want to be on the honor side. Think about the things that Jesus taught. Don't sit over here, but sit on the end, so the person who invited you or who is the host will say, "Friend, why are you over here? Why don't you come up here?" And then you'll walk up and you'll have what? You're being honored. That was rich. Okay. But let's say that you planted yourself right next to the host, and that wasn't your chair, and the guy said, I'm sorry. I like you a lot, but this is not a place for you. Your seat is down there. And so what do? You get up and you go, that's shame. That's the walk of shame. So the walk of honor, walk of shame. So if there's a big catastrophe and the wine gives out and the provisions are not there for the coming and going of people, then who is going to be dishonored? What are they going to say as they walk home? They come and to this feast, they go, feast? What feast? We came here. Look, now they're talking. What's going on? Are they having trouble? Are they in financial problems? What's going on? You can imagine all the gossip that's happening. And people leave, and what has happened to the honor of the host? Yeah, not back then. It's going to come to him. He is going to be dishonored, and people will remember that for the rest of his life, no doubt about it. That would be the wedding that bombed, that you are to learn from, from Mr. So-and-so's wedding. So you can see the shame in all of this. So it's a big deal. Now, Mary, why is Mary so concerned about it? Well, she has some kind of relationship. We don't know who these people are that are getting married, but it seems to be close. So why is it really, what's really at stake? I think what's at stake, of course, is the honor of the family. Now, how does Jesus save the celebration? Well, it's an interesting story. There's water pots, okay, and he tells them to fill it up with water, at least Mary does, and he turns it into wine, and they got plenty of provisions for everybody. No one knows what's happened except the servants and Jesus and Mary. Even the head waiter, the caterer, or whoever's in charge of everything, he doesn't even know. In fact, he thinks he's been, hoodwinked a little bit. Not in a bad way, but he notices that the wine that Jesus made is substantially better than what has been served to the guests. So let me look at this for just a minute. John chapter 2 and verse 3. John chapter 2 and verse 3. The mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, why would she come to Jesus? Yeah, she knew something about her marvelous son, okay? She's always held things in her heart. This is a unique individual. I know who he is. So she comes to him. Well, she comes to him expecting what? Why would she think that Jesus would do something? Well, she knew that he would be at least concerned, don't you think? She knew he could. Then we have this statement, "Woman, what do I have to do with you?" That sounds really harsh in English. It's not. Some have kind of argued that it's an endearing statement. It's not really endearing either. It's a statement that is setting what we might say distance between Jesus and his mother. Jesus is establishing something here in how he speaks to her. Now, we know it's not a harsh, ugly term because it's the same term that he uses on the cross when he says, "Woman, behold thy son." He's talking to John. "Behold thy mother." So it's a term of respect, but it's a term that Jesus does here that's showing that he is on this level now separate from her. There's some distance here because he's going to say, "My what has not yet come. My time or my hour has not yet come." Well, in John, that's another theme that parallels the theme of the 7 signs. All through these interactions, you have Jesus making a statement, my time has not come, my hour has not come, my hour has not come. And then he says, the time has come. And it has to do with his arrest and crucifixion and all that. Okay? So, what is Jesus establishing here? Yeah. She recognizes who he is. And Jesus is going to get involved. So if this is the first sign, okay, there's several things. It's a difficult passage. But it seems to be Jesus is recognizing, look, I'm doing this not because you're my mother. Woman, you have nothing in common with me. See, she's calling upon him to do something. He's going to do something. He's going to do it on his own terms. Okay? He's setting a distance here by this statement. And then she goes ahead and tells him, you just do whatever he says, and she's out of it. And he does the activity. This also could be the indication, it seems to be, that this is the beginning toward an end in John's gospel. Jesus reveals himself in John 2, with this, and it leads ultimately to the final hour. So, we have Jesus saving and intervening in this celebration. My hour has not yet come. I've given you the passages you'd like to look through those on your own time. But this is a polite distancing, if you please, of Jesus from Mary in this situation. Because he's going to do it. He's going to use his power. Now, why so much wine? I mean, that's a lot. 120 to 180 gallons of water into wine. Well, there could be several reasons. Well, one, it could be early in the 7 weeks. Maybe they didn't anticipate and plan as well. Maybe they counted what they needed and miscalculated. Some have taken it sort of as a spiritual thing that, whatever Jesus does, he gives the best. And I think that's legitimate symbolism. I don't know if that's the issue here. Why so much? Well, families had water pots for ceremonial cleansing, and they also kept wine for the purposes of purifying the water. So I don't know if he's just giving it for the provisions, or he's providing also even extending it out for the family. I mean, he's doing what seems to be an overboard a blessing. There is a symbolism in the Old Testament about wine. Symbolism often denotes joy, happiness, as a symbol. Why are there 6 water pots? You ever thought about that? Only 6? Only 6, that's a lot. They're big. But there's a lot of symbolic meaning of numbers in the gospel. What does 6 normally represent? What? Incompleteness, imperfection, whatever. 666 is nothing but 6, exponentially, which is evil, epitome of evil. The opposite of that is holy, holy, holy. Okay, in the book of Revelation. But 6 can be that symbol of imperfection. So what John's illustrating, it seems to me, in a somewhat deeper sense, is how Jesus is perfection. He overcomes the imperfection. He's the problem solver. He is the one, the go-to person that has the answers and has the ability to solve the problem. Interesting. Probably, yeah. The issue is that wedding and the honor of the family. Okay, if you have that in mind, it's not whether the wine is alcoholic or grape juice. You're missing the point. Jesus is doing what? He's inserting himself to save a family from embarrassment and a complete catastrophe. Now that is interesting, because I wouldn't normally think of God doing that. So this brings me to the statement of the last point. What is God like? Okay? What God is like. Take it from Mary's point of view. What's Mary's perspective of God? Huh? How does she look at God? Any ideas? Oh, yeah. Jesus, I can count on him. He can do something. He's going to get involved. So here's this expectation from his mother. That's an interesting concept in reference to God, is it not? Sometimes it's the church or the leaders of the church or the preachers, the last one to know about problems that people are facing. They go to the preacher of the church after they tried everything else and failed. Maybe try Jesus first and not last. That's why I don't like the sign, when all else fails, try Jesus. It sounds on the surface pretty good. I don't agree with it. You know, why would you spend time failing at everything else and then say, oh, I'll try the Jesus now? It don't make sense to me. Try Jesus first. That's Mary. Okay, from the servant's point of view, they witnessed the miracle, right? So what's their view of who this guy is? Yeah, what an amazing individual. He's got, there's something about him. Look what he did. The disciples' point of view. Do you know at the end of this event it says, the disciples saw this and they believed in him. Well, I thought discipleship, you already believed. Why does John say, and they believed in him? They're already believers. They're followers. They're disciples. That's what a disciple is a believer. But John says they saw this and they believed in him. So from their perspective, what's God like? What does it tell us about them and their relationship to Jesus? They're growing. Yeah, none of us have God figured out. Okay? There's lots of things that we know that the Bible teaches, but you're going to grow. There's going to be aha moments in your life concerning your relationship with God and what can be achieved in his name. So they believed. That is, it grew. It grew in belief. That's what's called being rooted and grounded. And, you know, their roots just went after all this. Now the question is, what do you think the last question is? Yeah. From your point of view, who's Jesus? Where are you in this? Or point of view of Mary, servants, disciples, something else? But I think that's the point that John is making from the sign. Now, at this stage in the narrative, John is illustrating from the disciples that growth is going to occur at each sign till you come to the final sign. Okay? So we're in the beginning of the growth. The disciples believed in him. Well, there's other things that people had as well. This is encouraging because we're not all at the same place. Some of us are weak, some of us are strong, some of us may have been strong, now have become weak. It almost sounds biblical, doesn't it? So I think this is illustrating that. This happens. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the opportunity to study and to look into this event, Wedding at Cana. We know there's so much in it, and we probably have not been able to just deal with the surface of the insight that we could gain. But we do pray that you'll help us to see ourselves and understand the application of seeing who Jesus really is and how we can also apply his sociability, his ability to be sensitive to the situation and available to do something helpful, and particularly on this case, very creative. Thank you for giving us an example, and we pray that we can mirror his principles and his attitude and how he lived among people. Bless us as we continue our worship in a few moments. Thank you for today and everyone who is here and those who may be with us virtually.